Hello and welcome to the show. Now, if you ask most motorsport fans what is their favourite era of rallying, chances are they're going to say the Group B era. These cars are legendary in their own right. They are absolutely bonkers. For the time, the vehicles were officially putting out around the 450-500 horsepower mark. However, when the engineers wanted to whack up the turbos, God knows how powerful they get. Lancia could apparently get over 700 out of the Delta from time to time. Not that you'd want to race necessarily with that, they could do it. The cars were unbelievably fast, and these cars were unbelievably fast, not being driven around a racetrack, being driven on rally stages. Narrow, bumpy, rocky. One little mistake would end in a very, very big crash. And ultimately it did lead to the demise of the class. The cars were far too fast, far too dangerous, and the spectators not well enough controlled at these events. It sadly led to the downfall of Group B, but the vehicles are, well, still very much legendary. Today you have the likes of the Audi Quattro 205 T16, Delta S4 amongst them, but the likes of the RS200 and Metro 6R4 in that category as well. And thanks to games like Dirt Rally 2, we get to play around with these cars. It did get me thinking. At the time, these were unbelievably fast cars, but we're talking in the mid-80s here. What are the vehicles like to drive? How fast are they compared to more modern machinery? Not just the straight-up modern vehicles, but other different categories and so on. Which naturally led me to a bit of investigation here on Dirt Rally 2. I was going to be taking a variety of different cars from all sorts of different classes and eras down one particular Argentinian rally stage. This is the El Rodeo stage. It is slightly less than 2 miles long and absolutely brutal. And I thoroughly enjoy this circuit. It is tough for this stage. It is very tough. I picked this nice short stage so there was something that I could learn and try and be consistent across all of the different vehicles. The 205 T16 was going to run for the Group B cars here. Arguably was the most successful of the Group B cars. You might argue the Delta S4 was slightly faster, but of the Group B cars, the most successful, the 205, it is mad. We're talking 480 horsepower in this car. 480 horsepower in a car that weighs 2,000 pounds. The power to weight ratio is immense, and you are chucking this around. There are rocks everywhere. There are hairpins everywhere. The course is incredibly bumpy. As you're racing along here, it's actually quite difficult to see half the time because you're bouncing around near constantly. I don't think there's one small bit of a straight coming up later, but you're coming towards hairpins and the car is bouncing and shaking. It's very difficult to simply see where you're going. And this is in a car with nearly 500 horsepower, in a car that weighs practically nothing. It is okay in terms of the grip. It isn't the grippiest vehicle to drive, and of course, the Group B cars, well, notoriously difficult to drive in real life, but in Dirt Rally 2, this is probably one of the toughest vehicles you will have to try and drive quickly through these stages. There is no doubt about it. It'd take one tiny mistake, just slightly running wide, is going to end in a very, very big crash with this sort of car. And the other difficulty, and I had this especially with the 205, but especially on this stage, turbos. Of course, to get so much power in these cars, they had crazy turbo setups, and, well, if you're in the wrong gear at the wrong time, you have absolutely zero go in the car, and I mean zero go in the car. And for the 205, now I'm running all of these cars with stock tuning, because if I start fiddling with the tuning on one car, I don't know if I can keep them all balanced. I don't know if I can tune them well enough equally, so I just keep them running as they stock, as they come from the game. And, well, second gear was a little too long, and first gear I buzzed the limiter a lot, but I couldn't be in second. If I was sort of too low in the rev range in second, the turbos weren't doing anything and you just went nowhere out of a corner. So it was quite a faff, and there's a lot of buzzing the limiter in first in places just to try and get the car going somewhere out of a corner. It was difficult. You had a lot of things to manage with the 205. So its benchmark time through this course was going to be a 2:28.444, which is not a bad time through this stage. I'm not the best driver in the world when it comes to dirt, but it's consistent because I'm the same driver across all of the cars. Now, the first vehicle I was going to run following the 205 would be the Sierra Cosworth. Now, we're not expecting to see the Sierra go faster here. This was more just for my curiosity. At the end of the day, the Quattro, when that came along, it pretty much put pay to the rear-wheel drive rally cars. While, yes, the likes of the Lancia 037 could just about keep up with it on tarmac. Indeed, the Lancia was the only rear-wheel drive car ever to beat the Quattro. That was only on tarmac. As soon as you got to the dirt stages are too. You've got to the snow, to the sand, to the mud, wherever it might be. You are rallying, let's face it, they're going to be dealing with all sorts of terrain. Here it's kind of, I think it's heavy gravel they call it here, but basically, yeah, we're on gravel around here. There's simply not the traction from just having the rear wheels driven. Also, I'm not the best, of all the categories of car on Dirt Rally, I'm not amazingly good, or I struggle the most with rear-wheel drive cars, shall we say. I will say, though, the Sierra is probably the nicest that I've driven. I've driven the Stratos, the Renault 5, and so on, and they were quite fiddly, especially the Renault 5, very difficult, very twitchy to get things right with that car. The Sierra is more forgiving. The Sierra is much, much more forgiving around these stages, so I did actually quite enjoy driving the car. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not as fast as an all-wheel drive car by any stretch of the imagination. It is good fun to drive around these courses, around these stages. It is very good fun. We're not expecting this to be the Group B car. It has less power, a mere 310 horsepower in this, and we're 590 pounds heavier. So it's got less power, more weight, and we haven't got that huge punch out of the corners. You'll see the car slithering and sliding around, especially in these slower hairpins. It just can't get going up the hills in the same way that you would with the all-wheel drive machinery. So the time for the Sierra Cosworth along the stage, a 2:48.982. Now remember, this is a very short stage, and that is still 20-second difference. 20 seconds difference between the two cars. So, we move on to Lancia. Of course we're going to have to run a Lancia through here. We go to Group A, the class that would replace Group B. And we have, well, the Delta, the most successful rally car in history ever. Not just in class, in history ever. Now, the Delta, I love driving this car. I have to say, I absolutely love driving this car on Dirt Rally. It is... I'm not going to say easy, because none of these cars are easy to drive fast. It's never easy to drive fast in anything on a rally stage like this. However, if there's a car that I have confidence in pushing, if there's a car that I have confidence to chuck around the corner, the Delta is one of them, because it has surprising amount of grip while still an awful lot of go. Yes, it's turbocharged, but we don't have the horrendous turbo problems. You can, if you are a little bit of a fool with the car at some of the hairpins, you can get into a little issue with the vehicle, but on the most part, you are okay accelerating out of the corners. The gearing's much better, and just in general, the car is much more user-friendly. The car is much more user-friendly than the 205 T16. I mean, it's still pretty damn powerful as well, let's not forget here. This is 350 horsepower at 2,400 pounds, so pretty impressive power to weight ratio going on. Plenty of power in the Delta to punch it out of these corners, and it deals, you know, brakes are very good, handling is very good. It has, well, I say it has a lot of grip. I mean, we are on gravel, we're skidding around, but in relative terms, the car has a lot of grip when you can chuck it about, and it shows. The Lancia Delta would go fast. Now, we're not talking by a very large amount here. It's a 227.8. We're only talking 0.6 of a second faster than the 205, but it does go faster. Now, what about more modern machinery? This is the Evo 10. This is the N4 category, NR4, N4 category. Now, of course, much more modern technology. Much more modern technology in the Evo to run down this course. But, the car is actually quite a lot bigger, just in general, in size, in physical length. It is quite a bit heavier, at 2,700 pounds. So we're talking 700 pounds heavier in the Evo, and we are down on power. 300 horsepower, which is not a small amount of power. Again, do not get me wrong, 300 horsepower running around on the dirt is not a small amount of horsepower, but it's 180 horsepower down on the 205. But, again, controllability is pretty good on these cars. You know, they're not too difficult to chuck around the course. They're quite forgiving of mistakes, as forgiving as a rally car is going to be when you're running millimetres away from the rock faces here. I think I brushed the wall. There we go, brushed the wall slightly on the inside. I can get away with the tiniest nicks on the wall without losing time really through all of this. I like driving this category of car. I do like driving this category of car. It's fun to throw around the stages. It's nice to have that perhaps a little bit more of security, but it does ultimately lack the kind of acceleration you get from the Delta, and the Delta can kind of match it really when we get to the turns. Oh, it's a bit, to be honest, this was the fastest run I got with the... I was going for it at this point with the Evo 10. Like, that was up onto its side. I mean, this is a... You don't get a second to rest around this stage. It covers all sorts of... Well, it's not particularly high speed. It don't cover high speed. It covers a lot of different challenges for a rally car. However, the Evo 10, even on the fastest run, 233.2, 5 seconds down on the 205. Perhaps that might not be the biggest surprise. I mean, it is not, it's a modern rally car. It's not exactly the fastest rally cars. We go to front-wheel drive up next. We have the R2 category of vehicle, the Peugeot 208. Now, I like front-wheel drive. I thoroughly enjoy rallying around in the front-wheel drive cars, and this 208 is brilliant. It is brilliant to drive. You can have a lot of fun. You can have a lot of fun with this. It is the least powerful car here we have by a very long way. I say a very long. 185 horsepower is what you get in this, which is more than enough to get you into an awful lot of trouble when driving around a very bumpy Argentinian stage. I mean, this section down here is a very fast chicane. It's kind of a very fast blind chicane, of which I got about a millimetre away from the rock going through. There were a couple of times I took that corner and I felt sure I was going to hit the rock, and I must have been a millimetre away because, it's scary. Even in a car like this, it is scary. And of course, front-wheel drive is, again, not your ideal drive line. I'm actually asking a huge amount of the front tyres here. They've got to power the car on gravel and do all the turning and do a lot amount of the braking. You're asking them to do a huge amount. Thankfully, it's fairly light as well, 2,200 pounds in that, and it goes quicker than the Sierra Cosworth, a 240.2 for the Peugeot. It is 8 seconds faster, 8.5 seconds faster than the Sierra Cosworth. We are 7 seconds down though on the Evo. That's to be expected, really. Let's be honest. We do have another category of rear-wheel drive car. We have a mad category of rear-wheel drive car up next. This is the Rally GT category. Now, while the Aston Martin, I know very much, is a rally car, I've seen it run at Goodwood, I'm not sure if they actually rally the Camaro or the Mustang. I think the Porsches, I've seen Porsche rally cars rallying on tarmac stuff. I don't know if they're actually rallying them on dirt. There are various now rear-wheel drive rally cars. Jaguar have the F-Type. Fiat are actually rallying the 124 in the rear-wheel drive category. So we are starting to see, I think it's an Siege as well I've seen rally. Either way, this is a kind of, I think it's RGT category is now an official category that is running. Regardless, I was using the Camaro simply because I hadn't driven it before in this game. I've driven the Aston, driven the Mustang before, but I wanted to have a go with the Camaro. I mean, it's got a lot of power, 460 horsepower, putting it almost up with the 205. There is a problem with the car. It's by far the heaviest here, 3,200 pounds. We've got 20 less horsepower and 1,200 pounds more weight. It's rear-wheel drive, which means you're scrabbling around for traction almost constantly, and it's just a big, bulky car. It's a spectacular sight. I mean, it's an absolutely incredible sight. It's a great addition to the game to have these vehicles, as something to drive, as something to try and get up these courses. They are not easy. As I said, I'm not the strongest when it comes to rear-wheel drive cars, full stop, but it's certainly a tough challenge trying to feed the Camaro. I will say, of the Camaro, Aston and Ford that I have driven, I do kind of like the Camaro the most. I think it's probably the slowest of the group, possibly, but I do like the Camaro the most to drive. Aston Martin is considerably lighter, but I do like it to drive. However, it gets beaten quite convincingly, actually, by the 208. It does go faster than the Sierra Cosworth, which does make it, I guess, the fastest, well, it doesn't make it the fastest rear-wheel drive car, but the 208 considerably better. The 208 considerably better down this course. Now, as I alluded to and talked about the Camaro, of course, while, yes, cars are in their various categories, some are a bit faster than others. Which did get me wondering, how would the Metro 6R4 fare on this stage? Because, well, as much as I love the car, it wasn't the best of the Group B cars. I think its highest position was a 6th or something in an event. It's mad and ludicrous and insane that this ever was created, and I love it for that. But truth be told, it wasn't the fastest of the Group B vehicles, unlike the 205, Quattro, etc. It was kind of competing on a little bit of a different level. So how would this fare, how would that work in Dirt Rally 2, and how would this fare along the stage? While it was immediately noticeable that it wasn't as quick as the 205, I will say one thing. If I had to choose one of these cars to drive for a very, very long time across very, very challenging stages, the Metro is actually nicer to drive. Admittedly helped by not quite the same level of insane turbo tomfoolery that we had to fight with in the Peugeot. This was just generally nicer to drive. It might be that it was nicer to drive because we were going slower, because we were down on the 205, because we weren't accelerating as fast as the 205, we weren't hitting corners quite as fast. So it might have been that, yeah, we weren't quite carrying as much quarter speed, so it felt like there was more grip almost, if that makes sense. In some ways, this, yeah, felt easier to control. I felt like I'd make less mistakes rallying in the Metro, but as I said, it is slower. It's a 233.8 for the Metro, which puts it down in fourth. It puts it slower than the Evo 10. I mean, it's a fair bit off the 205 T16, but it was a nice car to drive. And our final vehicle to run through the course, we have the R5 Rally category. Now, this is the fastest modern category that we have in Dirt Rally 2. I'm using the Skoda for this because I like the Skoda Fabia, and we don't see Skoda very often in games, so we've got to represent them when they appear in a game. Now, this is not the full modern WRC cars. As much as I would love to do this comparison with some of those, sadly, Dirt Rally doesn't have the license for that, because funnily enough, they're in the WRC games. So the R5 cars are what we have access to, which I believe is the tier below WRC. I could be wrong, that's what I've been told, I think that is anyway. Which means that while, yes, this is a modern car with all modern technology, power-wise, we're at 280 horsepower. That's 200 horsepower down on the Group B cars. It's a fair bit down on the Lancia Delta. And weight-wise, it's 2,712 pounds. The same weight as the Evo 10. I presume that must have been the weight limit for the modern categories of car, pretty much. So power-to-weight ratio, we are much down on the Group B cars, on the Delta, the Group A cars. It is, of course, very, very grippy. It is, of course, you know, got the best technology, best suspension and whatnot working on this car. You can see how much I'm changing gear, grabbing handbrake, changing gear from the onboard shots. And I mean, it's absolutely not an easy car. It's not easy to drive quickly, but it could be a little more forgiving. However, in terms of speed, around this particular stage, it gets beaten by the 205. It's only by 0.4 of a second, and it is easier to drive quicker than the 205, or easier to drive quickly, unlike the 205, but it gets beaten by the 205. However, the Lancia Delta, the Group A Lancia Delta, was the fastest of the lot of them. And I did have a look, just sort of a brief comparison for my driving skill on here. When I looked at the leaderboards, my times for all of the cars were roughly 10 seconds down from the world leader's time. And I was fairly consistent with that across all of the cars. The furthest down I was in the front-wheel drive in the R2 car, the 208. So I was fairly consistent across those, which, at the end of the day, this is being driven by me. This is my experiences with the vehicles. And Delta, the Group A Delta, would be the fastest of the lot. In terms of how fast are the Group B cars on this, well, they're right up there. They really are. On a good run around that bumpy Argentinian stage, sorry, they are right up there with the fastest vehicles through the course. But, and this is the very, very big important part, they are very difficult to drive at that sort of pace. They are very, very difficult. The Delta, the Skoda, even the Evo 10, for example, were not that bad to drive. To be able to attack that course at that sort of pace, it wasn't too bad to drive. I'm not going to say easy, but it wasn't too bad. Trying to get the 205 to be cooperative around that course, and over, longer stages, over multiple stages, I feel like to try and run at that sort of level, the chances of making a mistake with a 205 are infinitely higher than the other cars that we ran. So yeah, you can push it to very, very similar times to the like of the Group A cars, to the likes of the modern R5 cars even, on Dirt Rally 2, but it's so damn tough to do such a thing. It is much easier, much more obtainable almost to do it with the Group A Delta. It's good fun though, and it was interesting. I wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't sure what to expect from this. I like that the Group A Delta was the fastest of the lot, and I will also say that I am not the greatest, although my timing was fairly consistent with the Skoda. I'm not the greatest with the ultra-modern cars, but overall it was consistent because it's a consistent, slightly wonky driver doing this. As I said, times with leaderboards were fairly similar. That, though, is going to be it for this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.